So they say the Catholic Church banned the Bible. It was forbidden under any conditions under pain of death. Galileo proves the Catholic Church is against science. The Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Torturing and killing so many people. Really? Let's examine it today. Hi, welcome to the Catholic Skeptic. My name is Hugh. I'm glad you could join us. Once again, thank you to all of my subscribers and all those who have been praying for us and as well. I appreciate all of that. Thanks to everyone who comments, including the ones who hate the Catholic Church with all your heart and just keep putting your vitriol on there. It's fine. You're just simply growing the channel for me. Thank you. So I appreciate that. But we're going to continue to, be able to put out good stuff here, hopefully, and by His grace. And we're talking about history today. All right, we all are familiar with the famous quote that has often been brought forth by, it's attributed to either Adolf Hitler or to his Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, that if you tell a lie often enough and long enough, people believe it. And when it comes to history, especially the history of the Catholic Church, as taught by Protestants and secularists and others, quite often you have errors, distortions of actual facts, and sometimes outright lies are being taught. So we're going to hit on some of these today. This may take a couple of videos to cover all of it, but I'm definitely going to, for this one, we're going to hit some major ones today, and then we'll look at some more maybe next time. But and search for truth, and that's all it comes down to is what is true. When I was a Protestant pastor, when it came to that, I wanted truth. I just wanted truth. So how'd you end up Catholic? Because I found the truth. When it comes to anything, you look for truth. And you look, and sometimes you just look for simple facts. Again, my favorite quote of the second president of the United States, John Adams: "Facts are stubborn things." When facts are fact, that's what it comes down to. So let's look at some different examples today of notions about history and things like that, and try to clear it up. And first of all, understand there is no question. All right, there are plenty of bad individuals in the Catholic Church in history you can point out. We've had bad, evil popes. We've had bad priests. Evil priests today have done horrible things. And I'm sure they'll all be answerable to judgment seat of God. There have been just as many evil Protestants who've done evil things in their traditions. The Catholic Church, as Oscar Wilde observed, the Catholic Church contains the greatest of saints and the greatest of sinners, whereas all the respectable people go to the Anglican Church. All right, his point there, he was a deathbed convert to Catholicism, and his point was that, yes, you're going to see that. So when the Catholic Church comes, yeah, there's plenty of sinful people in the church. There's also many holy people you never hear about. Many of the popes were holy saints. Many of the greatest saints, did everything, laid down their lives, in service of Jesus. So hitting individual things, there are certainly bad things that have happened, but many of those bad things have been distorted and pulled way out of sphere where they are, and some things have just been lied to. So we wanted to just talk about some of those things today. We'll start with the first one: banning the Bible. Like the Catholic Church banned the Bible. One of my commentators said it was under pain of death. No one could own a Bible. In fact, it was only lifted in 1966 by Pope Paul VI. Look, okay. Let's talk about this, what the basis of it is. Now, Lorraine Botner, the author of Roman Catholicism, a popular anti-Catholic book that many Protestants have either read it or you've been taught by people who read it. It has certainly a share of errors in it, but a popular notion is this idea of the banning of the Bible altogether, and the Catholic Church took this strong stand. And the story goes like this: that the Council of Valencia in the year 1229, Valencia is a city in Spain, the council was held in Valencia, and there the Bible was banned, and no layman could own the Bible, only clergy could own the Bible. Well, and furthermore, they put the Bible on the index of forbidden books. Yes, at the Council of Valencia, they declared the Bible should go on the index of forbidden books. That's how much the Catholic Church is against the Bible. Well, first of all, the index of forbidden books was established in 1543. So it was impossible to put the Bible or anything on it in 1229. All right. Second of all, there was no Council of Valencia. It didn't exist. Valencia is a city in Spain, and in 1229, the Moors controlled Spain. And for about 5 centuries off and on, there was a Christian-Muslim war going on for control of Spain. And at the time, that area where Valencia is, that was under the control of the Moors, the Muslim population. There's no way the Muslims would have even allowed a council of bishops to take place. And to be fair, if the Catholics and Church had been in charge, they wouldn't have allowed a Muslim conference of any sort. That's just the way it was in those days. Freedom of religion was not unheard of in 1229. So there was no Council of Valencia, all right? But where does the story come from then about the banning of the Bible? Well, in France, in Toulouse, France, there was a local council of bishops that did, for a time, ban the Bible for laymen. But let's understand the context of that, all right? There's something called the Albigensian heresy that was going on at that time. Now, many Christians, Bible-believing Christians, hear these little snippets of history, sound bites and snippets, so to speak, of history get caught up with us all the time. And so certain notions, become popular to be believed, all right? The Albigensians were not Christians. Many Protestants, including myself when I was a Protestant, used to believe that the Albigensians were one of those part of the secret remnant of true Christians under the horrible oppression of the Catholic Church. No, the Albigensians were heretics by any standard, Catholic or Protestant. They denied marriage. They considered marriage to be valid or necessary. They were an extreme Manichaean dualist group. Manichaeanism, which is dualism, is the belief that the spirit is pure and perfect, and anything in the flesh is totally evil. In fact, to a Manichaean, God didn't even create the physical universe, and a lesser God did, and that the real God is spirit, and so we have to just escape the flesh at all times. So marriage was considered forbidden. It was not allowed. Furthermore, fornication, on the other hand, was encouraged, because since the flesh is evil and you can't do anything about it, have fun, do your thing. So long before there was free love movement in the 1800s, there was the Albigensians, and they believed this. They also believed in ritual suicide. They considered killing yourself to be an honorable thing and an important thing, and so they encouraged ritual suicide. This is something that the Albigensians believe. Now, like many crazy cult groups, they try to use the Bible to back it up. You can, of course, if you want to, try to make the Bible say anything. A popular notion of flipping open the Bible, putting your finger down and saying, "And Judas hanged himself," and then flipping it open again, saying, "Go and do thou likewise." There's all kinds of ways people distort and string together a patchwork quilt of scriptures to say things. So the bishops of France felt that it was best for a period of time that the laymen would not be influenced by the Albigensian heresy. So yes, they did locally in the southern area of France ban the Bible for a while. That's what happened. It was a local decision by the local French bishops to do it. Was it a good choice? Was it the best way to handle it? Probably not. But that's what they chose to do. They thought that was the best thing at the time. Remember, we always think in 21st century terms in our lives. We think everybody had, you can't just pick up your phone and Google something in 1229. How do you find information out? Spreading of information, knowledge was very harder to come by. So they felt it was better that the clergy, the ones who were trained in the Bible, should be the ones teaching for a while. So yes, they did ban the Bible for a season in that local area. Eventually what happened, of course, was the Albigensian heresy died out. And when it died out, that stopped being enforced, and that was it. This idea of, well, they didn't lift this till then, or they didn't, really ridiculous. I mean, I own in my possession Catholic Bibles, one in particular that was dated in the 1800s with an endorsement by Pope Leo XIII, who was Pope back in the late 1800s, who talked about the importance of laymen reading the scriptures. Other ones by Pope Pius XII, long before Vatican II, endorsing the reading of Scripture. There was never this attitude, and even translating the Bible into the vernacular, into the language of the people, was not something the Catholic Church opposed all the time. There was an opposition to certain elements, but not all the time. So this event never took place. It was a local event, and that's it. There was no worldwide banning of the Bible. They weren't killing people for owning a Bible. That's not a valid historical conclusion to come to from the Catholic Church. But again, you hear these snippets, you hear these bits and pieces of things, and you put them together, and that's the case. And a lot of our knowledge of history is done that way. In North American and European history, the Catholic Church is often portrayed as the bad guy. In American culture, of course, for a long time, Catholics were kind. They were besides the other groups the Ku Klux Klan hated, they hated the Catholics too. There was a group called the Know Nothing Party in the United States in the 1800s that opposed the Catholic Church. There's a lot of when you have anti-Catholic stuff like that, you have that type of notion. JFK struggled to become president in 1960 because of a Catholic background. He's a Catholic man, a Catholic president. He'll bring the Pope in to rule America. This sort of paranoid foolishness that was rampant up until that time. So, and it's still rampant, unfortunately, among some evangelical minds regarding the Catholic Church. But no, there was not a banning of the Bible by any means. That's not something that was done by the Catholic Church. Similar along these lines are people like John Wycliffe and William Tyndale and their circumstances. Wycliffe, who was few hundred years before the Reformation, was a Bible translator, translating the Bible in English. He had some of the ideas. Protestants like to look at him as a hero. And of course, it's often said, well, John Wycliffe was burned at the stake as a heretic. They burned him at the stake as a heretic. Was that true? Well, sort of. John Wycliffe died at the age of 56 of a stroke, and he was buried. But in an aspect of fanatical need for dealing with him as a heretic, his body was exhumed, and then the body was burned at the stake. That's weird, but that's what went on. But Wycliffe's problem, as far as the Catholic Church having an issue with Wycliffe, was not the translation of the Bible so much as some of his views, like his crusade to try and get the Catholic Church to relinquish all of its property, take all the property away from the Catholic Church, something Henry VIII succeeded in doing in England when he, confiscated all of the lands of the monasteries and convents and put 15,000 monks and nuns into a homeless state, and sent all of those and gave that out to all of his wealthier, commoner friends, creating another level of class in England, the gentry. To go along with royalty, you have the gentry who built their estates on after evicting monks and nuns from their homes and their vows of poverty, forcing them to find some way to make a living again. And so it has been done, and that's kind of what Wycliffe advocated a few centuries before. That's where he was at. William Tyndale, a very interesting individual. William Tyndale, of course, did do Bible translations, and he was part of the Protestant Reformation, and he consulted with Luther's theological writings and went farther than him. But Tyndale's a complication, because Tyndale's translation work was used, and parts of the King James Bible certainly were strongly influenced by Tyndale's work. But Tyndale opposed Henry VIII getting his divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Tyndale wasn't British, and he was opposed that just as strongly as the Catholic Church did. He said there's no scriptural grounds for him to go off with Anne Boleyn and just follow his lusts and his concern for having a male heir, and just divorcing Catherine of Aragon, a perfectly faithful wife, in order to marry Anne Boleyn. So he opposed that too. So Henry VIII had people sending out to try and kill him. All right. Eventually, he did end up in Brussels, and that's where he was. He was in 1536. He was executed, and his body again burned after the execution. But yes, he would have been killed in England just as easily, because Henry VIII wanted him dead, because the whole foundation of the Church of England, which Henry VIII established officially in 1834, the Erastian state, influenced by this popular doctrine that Tyndale advocated very strongly of the idea, it's a Protestant thing, of Caesaropapism, and the idea of a political arm being the head of the church, and that each country should be the head of its own church. So the monarch, the king, Henry VIII was established himself as the supreme head of the church in England, as he called it. We now call it the Church of England, but he called it he's the supreme head of the church in England. Now, Henry VIII was very Catholic in his theological thinking. Henry VIII, in spite of his proclivity for getting rid of wives and killing wives, things like that, Henry VIII was once appointed defender of the faith by the Pope, and the Church of England under Henry VIII was much more Catholic looking, even in spite of the fact that it broke with the authority of Rome. But Tyndale, being very passionate for Scripture, did see the reality that his divorce was utterly invalid, and opposed that too. So Henry VIII would have been killed if he'd returned to England, and been killed wherever he was. In other words, he would have been killed by the Protestants or the Catholics. All right, and again, the arguments and oppositions that he held was more of an issue than the translating of the Bible. But again, this is a popular that's promulgated over and over again as a manner of trying to oppose, anything the Catholic Church was doing was evil. All right. Interestingly enough, of course, the way the history of England went with Henry, and then when Mary ascended the throne, Queen Mary, she became Bloody Mary. She returned the church. She returned England to Catholic rule, and yes, she did. She did kill about 300 Protestants and burn them at the stake. And it was an awful thing, horrible thing. What we don't ever realize, though, is that good Queen Elizabeth I ascended to the throne. She killed about just as many Catholics. All right, in terms of that, there was lots of a great slaughtering of Catholics done under Elizabeth's rule. This is a back and forth thing. All right, there are church people guilty on both sides of this issue of killing in Jesus' name, so to speak, and of meting out justice along these lines. So it's not an unusual thing that takes place. The burning of witches, for instance, one of the comments for that about it, Catholic Church didn't burn witches. There's almost no cases of that. There are lots of cases of Protestants, though. In fact, about 30,000 witches were burned, professed witches or accused witches that were burned in England at the time of in the Reformation times under the Protestant Church, 30,000. All right, in the Protestant section of Germany, 100,000. All right, that's so killing and murdering in the name of Jesus again has gone on a rampant scale on both sides. It's not something that we want to play with lightly, but it's never, it's funny as some of the commentators write in here though, and you make it sound like you've got the thing. Yeah, ooh, you didn't know that, did you? Ooh. It's like this isn't the case, but we don't often understand history for that reason. Next, another big one is Galileo. Ooh, Galileo. The Catholic Church is against science, and it opposed Galileo, and Pope John Paul had to pardon Galileo hundreds of years later. Pope John Paul made an apology for what had happened with Galileo. But there's a lot of misunderstanding about Galileo. In fact, there's like a sign in Rome on one of the steps of one of the areas near in Rome that says this is the place where Galileo was tortured. But the fact is, Galileo was never tortured. First of all, Galileo remained his entire life a faithful Catholic. Never renounced his faith once. All right. Almost 100 years before him was Copernicus. Now, Copernicus wrote a book. Copernicus was a mathematician, and he theorized mathematically the idea that the Earth and the other planets revolved around the sun, rather than the sun revolving around the Earth, which was the issue. They jokingly talk about Copernicus' book as the worst seller because only about 500 people ever wrote a copy. But Copernicus, who was he was either a Catholic priest for sure, or he was on road to becoming Catholic priest. He was there are little ordinations. You take minor orders on your way to becoming a Catholic priest. Again, stayed a faithful Catholic. He dedicated his book, which taught this theory that the Earth and the other planets revolve around the sun, to the Pope. And the Pope, in turn, endorsed that book. That book was very popular. There was no objection to that as being promoted as a scientific theory. Galileo came along with a telescope. Now, he wasn't the only one who had a telescope. There were lots of telescopes, but he had a really good one. And he began to calculate, and he began to see more evidence that would suggest that the Earth does indeed revolve around the sun. Now, I say suggest because we already know this. Remember, when we look at this issue, most of us have grown up with a full understanding that the Earth is round, that the Earth and the other planets revolve around the sun. We know there are galaxies. We know there are stars with other planets inhabiting them and other galaxies. Most of us grew up with photographs of Jupiter, close-up photographs of the moons of Saturn. We have satellites and space travel, and men went to the moon. We don't think in terms. You have to understand, in those days, this was new science to them. The Aristotelian doctrine, the doctrine of Aristotle, taught that the Earth was the center and the planets and the stars and that revolved around the Earth. That's what Aristotle taught. Ptolemy and the Ptolemaic theory was the dominant science of the day. That's what people believed. And speculating and learning about science was not something the Catholic Church opposed by any means. First of all, the Catholic Church, in case you don't know it, invented education, all right? The concept of college, university studies, that all was in the Western world established by the Catholic Church, all right? Scientific inquiry. It is the Protestants who opposed reason. Martin Luther's one who said that reason and faith don't go together and tried to create that separation. The Catholic Church never believed that. Thomas Aquinas in the 1200s, I've talked about before, he would do his theory when he would be taught when he would do his theology, his Summa Theologica, his big work. He would always begin every statement, every argument he was going to make by giving the best arguments against it first. He would present all the oppositions and then he would argue against it. He was known as the steelman arguer. The straw man argument, which is a popular thing, is to take the weakest thing in somebody's theory and use that as an attack. Thomas Aquinas would take the strongest argument against his theory and then oppose it. So, and his teacher Albert the Great was very big on natural sciences in the 1200s. Obviously, by our standards, it was probably weak science, but it was science, and it was a dedication to science. When Galileo began, Galileo was popular. He and Pope Urban, the Pope at the time, got together. There was a great closeness there. Cardinal Bellamy, who was also a scientist and who was the one working on this Galileo situation, worked with Galileo. But Cardinal Bellamy had concerns. They said, because understand this, Galileo and his telescope did not prove that the Earth orbited around the sun. It wasn't provable at that point. It was the evidence leaned more that way. Whenever there's new scientific theories, there is a paradigm shift. There has to be a change as far as what's believed. And for Galileo, that was the case. All right. So Galileo was apparently understood to be a very hot-tempered guy, and he got kind of fiery about the whole thing. And so Galileo apparently wrote a play where he had essentially a really smart character and a really dumb character and some other character talking to each other. And of course, the smart character, he put his words in the mouth of the smart character, and he put Pope Urban's words in the mouth of the dumb character because he didn't like the fact Pope Urban wasn't coming right and wanted to endorse him. So yes, Galileo was charged with suspicion of heresy. Suspicion of heresy. He was put on trial. He was ordered to do some penance, some prayer, reciting of some psalms and things like that. That was initially, first of all, what was happened. By the way, let me qualify it again so we understand this. The Catholic Church has never, no Pope has ever made an infallible declaration concerning whether the earth or the sun is the center, all right? The geocentric versus heliocentric understanding of the universe, right? That was never, the Church never took a stand on that, just like the Church doesn't take a stand on this theory of evolution. You know, a lot of Protestants are so happy about being anti-evolution. The Catholic Church doesn't have a direct thing. Pope Pius XII wrote an encyclical about evolution, talking about many good things in theory, but he didn't endorse the theory or deny the theory. He said, this is the scientific evidence we have. And the Catholic Church has taken this sort of attitude all along. That's where the priority is, you know. That's where it is understood in terms of Catholic understanding. But Pope Urban got very angry that he was made to look a fool in Galileo's little parody satirical play, and so he's put on trial. Galileo was censored, stopped from promulgating his theory, and yes, what was his punishment? He was put into a villa, a luxury villa with servants to live there for a while. All right, not a torture chamber. He was not tortured. He was treated very nicely, very kindly. But the whole reason for the opposition had nothing to do with the earth is the center, and it'll throw faith off if we don't believe the earth is the center of the universe. And first of all, it's not about the universe, it's about the solar system. They didn't understand that yet. Heliocentric, or which is the sun center, or geocentric, earth center. We understand today, of course, that the earth, in fact, our whole solar system is all in motion. You know, the Earth orbits the sun, but the sun moves too. The stars move. We're part of the outer edge of the Milky Way galaxy. We know there are multiple galaxies. All right, we don't know where the center of the universe is. Nobody's been outside the end to see what the center might be. All right, and the Catholic understanding, the writings, most of the Catholic understanding, going all the way back to St. Augustine, spoke about the fact of the idea that the center is theocentric. God is the center of everything. God is the creator, and the spiritual trumps the physical. The spiritual is changeless, it doesn't change, God doesn't change, whereas matter changes, and matter is malleable, and matter changes. That's the way that's where always where the focus of theological emphasis was. You know, the contemptus mundi, the contempt for the world, the idea of walking on the proper way and walking in order to know and love and serve God and go to be with Him. That was where the focus was on Catholic thinking in this area. It was never an opposition to science or to scientific inquiry or anything else. Right, so the notion of Galileo was this. Understand this. I mentioned before, Georges Lemaitre in the early 20th century was the originator of the Big Bang theory. Georges Lemaitre was a Catholic priest and an astrophysicist, and he's the one that launched the Big Bang theory. Now, he didn't come up with the term Big Bang. That was coined by someone else, and that person tends to get the credit for the whole theory. But Georges Lemaitre, Einstein was having fits at first. Einstein and Eddington and them, they knew Georges Lemaitre, and they worked with him. They went to conferences with him, and they first didn't like his theory. And they didn't like it because he was a priest. They're afraid he was trying to prove God by this theory. But when he showed that all the scientific evidence by which he based the Big Bang theory, they were like, okay, that makes sense. All right, and so the Big Bang theory became more an acceptable part of science. All right, now there's variations since then, but that still is a working model. And of course, it emphasizes the notion that there is a beginning to the universe. Whereas many of the scientific-minded, atheistic-minded people in the 1800s back always presumed that the universe just always existed. Instead of saying God always existed, they said the universe always existed. But that went away with the Big Bang theory. That changed. That change was there. The notion of the universe is continuously expanding in the way that it can be observed with empirical evidence changed that notion. All right. But the Catholic Church, we have Gregor Mendel, the father of modern genetics. There's all sorts of things. Even in Galileo's day, the Dominicans and the Jesuits, the most intellectual. Now the Dominicans ran the Inquisition, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But the Jesuits were very pro Galileo in his theories, and very pro Copernican, and they had many of them had telescopes and doing observation as well. But the theory of Galileo did not prove anything yet. It only was evidence leaned more. And in science, that's always the case. When there's battles, there's questioning, there's the uncertainties until one theory prevails over another. When the evidence becomes clear that way, that's how it works. But the Catholic Church is far from ever being anti-scientific. That's not been the case at all. The Catholic Church has been at the forefront of promoting science, all right, and promoting learning and promoting reason and seeing reason and faith going together and not having any difficulty with that. It's more of a Protestant notion to oppose reason, which is why you see so many evangelicals take that strong stand on the literal 6 days of the earth, only the young earth creation position, the earth's only 6,000 years old, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That thing comes more than ever. There are a few Catholics who embrace that, though. And as I said, the Catholic Church doesn't have an official theory on the age of the earth either, any more than it did on the earth as the sun as the center. All right, those were things that the Catholic Church took an official stand on. But Galileo lived out his days quite comfortably. And there was not he was not tortured or anything else. So understanding that again is one of these myths, one of these erroneous distortions that's come about through history, and so we want to understand that distinction. Okay, so what about the Spanish Inquisition? Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. That becomes the big thing. All right, the Inquisition. Well, first of all, the Inquisition, which has existed in one form or another it ran for about 500 years, as far as 5 centuries of existence in different places. The Spanish one is the most famous, but it had to do with just that, and making inquiring, having inquisition into theological matters, and it was where professors went to go to get their theological theories approved by the church or not, whether they're theologically in line with what the Catholic Church teaches. The Spanish Inquisition, of course, became eventually ultimately an arm of the Spanish state. All right. It existed for like 350 years. Now, did it torture people? Yes, there were some things that were done that were not right. Tortured, wicked things were done. Absolutely. Was it to the extreme that many people think? Not really. Again, like I said, when I mentioned you the numbers before, and when it came to, Protestant witch burnings in England, 30,000 people were killed. When it came to, witch burning in Protestant parts of Germany, 100,000 people were killed. The Spanish Inquisition, in Spain in particular, lasted for about 350 years. It's estimated, there's differences in numbers, but around that it did kill about 2,000 people. Now, granted, that's 2,000 too many. You shouldn't have killed anybody. But the fact is they did. All right? They did. That's what went on. But it comes out to about maybe 2 people a year were killed by the Spanish Inquisition. This Holocaust level horror of genocidal mania that's often portrayed is off. It's false. All right? And this understanding again, but this is not a whitewashing of the Catholic Church by any means. Yes, there's evil popes who did evil things. There's evil priests who did evil things. There were various things that were done. Pope Julius rode around with armor and a sword, killing heretics personally in battles. All right, is that right? No, I don't believe it's right. But that's happened. That's the reality of it. See, from a Catholic perspective, all right, the Catholic Church. Again, many holy popes, great saints amongst the popes, more than the bad guys. They outweigh the bad guys on the whole list. All right, the holy saints that have been raised up. Many of them, when people think, for example, Pope Innocent in the 12th century, we think of him presided over the Fourth Lateran Council. A lot of things. Pope Innocent is well known, but the more prominent person known in that year was St. Francis of Assisi, who came in poverty and walked to Rome to get permission for his order of Friars Minor, the little brothers of Jesus, essentially, this holy order that would go around and preach the gospel, live in poverty, and served God, and did tremendous things. That's what Catholics think of. You think of all of the great saints, and that's St. Catherine of Siena rebuked popes. St. Bernard of Clairvaux often rebuked popes when they needed it for various issues. All right, but the point is that with the structure and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, the doctrine was always preserved. First of all, the doctrine preserved, the administration of the sacraments, which are the means of grace, were preserved. All these were, but amongst how God used people, where there was miraculous things happening, where supernatural things were happening, where mighty moves of God were happening, oftentimes it was not with any hierarchy at all. It was among the smaller groups among the people. But the Church preserved the sanity during this period of time. It preserved that. When the Cathars were operating, which the Albigensians were a sect of, the Cathars were advocating people should starve themselves to death. They were doing wacky, flaky things all over the place, and they were gaining a lot of followers. It was the Catholic Church who told the line, so to speak, and held to the fact that that's insane, that's foolishness, it's that common sense. The Catholic Church, one of the reasons that I call this the Catholic skeptic. The Catholic Church always takes a skeptical approach to whenever there's so-called supernatural happenings taking place. The Catholic, you think, oh, these stories about Catholics, the statues of bleeding, and the tears on the Virgin Mary, and this happened and that happened, and visions and there. Listen, the Catholic Church, you'd be surprised, doesn't approve of a lot of that. There are certain visions that there's enough evidence to say, yes, it's acceptable to believe this. But you're free to not believe any of them if you don't want to. That's the Catholic stand on that. But when there's supernatural things going on, the Catholic Church investigates it thoroughly. The Catholic Church has, or at least had it, but I think maybe they finally don't have it as official as it used to be, an office of the devil's advocate. I've mentioned this before. The devil's advocate. We use that term all the time. Let's play devil's advocate. There was literally a devil's advocate, all right? In fact, the last man I know who has stood in that office in the Catholic Church was Christopher Hitchens, the late atheist, the famous atheist Christopher Hitchens. He was the devil's advocate on the Mother Teresa case for sainthood, because Christopher Hitchens, for those who don't know, had a strong opposition to Mother Teresa. He had strong issues with the fact that she seemed to have a friendship with baby Doc Duvalier, well-known dictator, and it was taking money from him that he was taking from his people. So there were some issues there, and Christopher Hitchens had a fit about it. He tried to oppose her case for slavery, and he literally was used by the Catholic Church to argue against it. He didn't prevail, obviously, but the point is, the Catholic Church takes a skeptical attitude. If there's some thought of a demon possession, an exorcism going on in the Catholic Church, the first thing that happens to that person is they are put through a battery of medical testing, psychological and psychiatric investigations. All kinds of things have to be ruled out, chemical imbalances in the blood, brain issues, all sorts of things before there's any recognition there might actually be a demonic presence there that needs to be cast out. The church doesn't jump on that. Miracle stories of someone who's there. There's a long, slow process of investigation with a high level of skepticism. That's why some of our famous things were people who struggled with this. The well-known Padre Pio, who had this thing on, bleeding hands and the feet, lived in Italy, and Shia LaBeouf portrayed him in a movie recently. When the movie seems to be missing right now, I don't know what's happening with that, but he died in 1968. There were great miracles attributed to Padre Pio, but Padre Pio was stifled in the 1960s by some of the bishops and that, and suffered greatly because he was, they wanted to put him in isolation for a while. They didn't want to even celebrate this. There was great investigation and a very skeptical mindset to see whether there was actual evidence, which the evidence seemed to prevail that he did have supernatural things happening to him. But that's the way the Catholic Church approaches it. It's never approached with this giddy naivete about how things come, and so often things like the silly things that exist today, like the cinnamon bun with the image of the Virgin Mary on it, or the face of Jesus, or these silly things that go on today, the image of Mary appearing on a glass building, and it turned out to be nothing but the reflections of the glass, whatever. Yeah, the Catholic Church as many people just laugh at that as much as the secularists do, and say, well, let's examine this and see if this is a reality to this. But see, that understanding isn't done in history when you have snippets and little statements. If you read about Galileo, as we said in a scientific textbook, Galileo showed that from his evidence that the Earth revolved around the sun, and that was so opposed to the Catholic doctrine and the notion of the Earth as a center, and it changed the thinking of Europe. So therefore, the Catholics opposed that as much as possible because they oppose science. In the second edition of the Cosmos series, the one that was done with Neil deGrasse Tyson, the animation that's used in that was done by Seth MacFarlane. And Seth MacFarlane is a brilliant comedy writer and animator and all that, but he's also a rabid atheist, and his influence is quite there. They would portray these, Catholic bishops with these dark clothes and red, evil-looking eyes and a horseback coming in, and that mindset of the Catholic Church is so opposed to science and thinking. Not the case at all. Not the case at all. And that notion is just not there. But when you hear these stories of history, when you hear these things that happened, and these really outlandish things like the pain of death, and they were killing people over the Bible, see if that's really true or not. Look it up. One of my commentators had right away asked me about they burned John Wycliffe at the stake. I said, well, actually, they burned his body, but he died of a stroke, natural causes. But we don't think about that because we just hear one thing and just kind of run with it. And our knowledge of history exists that way. Just like as I said, it's sort of I don't know what the term is for sound bites when it's printed, but it's print bites, I guess. These little snippets and things. That's why textbooks are such an awful thing so many times, especially when it comes to history. Textbooks. You're not getting a lot out of a textbook. You're getting somebody's little association of how things should be done. And you learn certain things, and you develop certain ideas, and you just accept those as automatic. the young earth theory, for example. St. Augustine, back 6th century time frame, he wrote commentary on Genesis, and he didn't consider the 24 hours to be literal days at all, and he had a whole different kind. And this is going back centuries back. That's the case. This young earth notion that we have to take every day of the 60 days of Genesis as literal 24-hour days. If we don't take it as that, then we don't believe anything in the Bible. It's like that was not a thinking process at all, and it certainly was never the Catholic understanding. The Catholic understanding understands that the Bible is a collection of books. Some of them are historical facts, some parts of them are allegory, and some of them are poetry, some of them are song and music, like the Psalms. They're wisdom literature, the Proverbs, things like that. There's all sorts of things in there. And you have to see that collection of books as just that. It's like pulling a random book out of a public library and saying, "See, this didn't reading. It happens to be a fictional story. Well, see, that didn't happen. Well, no, it didn't. It's fiction, but that's in there." You want to understand that reality across the board. So the Catholic Church has never taken that type of a stand. So if you want to understand historical issues and things like that, don't assume these things you immediately. Well, one of the notions of the Catholic Church in Europe killed. They have this term mentioned 95 million people. Well, the population of Europe didn't even reach that level until a long time after the events that they were describing. But again, when you have a bias, when there's automatically a hatred for certain things, automatic mindset, in us, we talk about confirmation bias. In an argument, sometimes if you just believe something, you'll look for all the evidence that proves it. And if you're against something, the anti-version of that is there too. If you hate something, you'll try to find everything against it. So you definitely have to do it in accordance with the way it's done. So when you look at history, try to understand it that way, all right? The Catholic Church, again, is composed of great saints and great sinners. But don't assume every event you read about, everything, especially when it's an evil report, is always a truthful report. All right? Look into it, investigate it. And either way, it's Christ we look to. All right? It's His grace we look to. The wonder of His grace, of His church, of His sacraments, of His teaching. That's what matters in our walk with God as Catholics. And that's the understanding that we have put forth. Not being on a crusade against every boogeyman we happen to find somewhere. Ooh, we got to get that. Let's have that understanding, that mindset. But we'll look into more things next time. Again, please hit like and subscribe if you like this video. Keep us in prayer. God bless you all. Thanks for watching. And always here in my prayers. All right, God bless. Thanks.